Somebody tell me.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Arjun Karpal. I'm our China technology correspondent, but I also do a lot of work on blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Roller coaster. That's probably the best way I'd describe last year when it came to what happened with digital tokens and the broader blockchain industry. We saw the crash of many of these token prices, but there was, of course, an intense focus on the underlying technology, and that is blockchain. Many blockchain companies popped up and failed, but there are many that are trying to create real businesses that can stand the test of time. But is it still just a bunch of hype, or is this industry here today? Thankfully, I have a star-studded and much more smarter people here on the panel to talk to me about that. Let me just introduce them. Edith Young here, partner at 500 Startups. We've got Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple. Jeff Schumacher, the founder of BCG Digital Ventures. And Glenn Hutchins over there, the co-founder of Silver Lake Partners. Right, let's kick off. Jeff, I want to kick off with you. You made the call, and I want to start with Bitcoin because this is a good starting point for us to branch out and talking about the underlying blockchain technology. Jeff, you have said Bitcoin will go to zero. We saw a crash last year in the price of Bitcoin. What drove that movement, and do you still hold that view?
I think we look at it, or now let's put my personal views. I do believe it'll go to zero. I think it's a great technology, but I don't believe it's a currency. It's not based on anything. If it became the standard currency, and because of the proof of work model that it sits on, if it got to what would be called the gold standard back in the 70s, the dollar was pegged against the gold standard. If Bitcoin was pegged against gold standard, which is about $7 trillion-ish, it would be responsible for 20% of the world's CO2 production. So just by that alone tells you it's not going to be the go-forward thing, at least from my view.
Glenn, you mentioned in an article at the start of 2018, you said Bitcoin could turn out to be a winner. It could also turn out to be Betamax. Have you figured out what it ultimately is going to be in the year since you made those comments?
So I'm much less interested in and investing around Bitcoin as a currency unit or currency equivalent, or even the blockchain as an accounting ledger, and I'm thinking much more about the protocols. In other words, what is the underlying protocol going to do as a consequence of which tokens are valuable or not, right? And where we sit today, by the way, one thing I would say is this notion of, I first came to Davos 2002, people all told me that the internet was dead because the internet stocks were all down by 90%. I said, no, I think we have a little bit left to show you in that space. So I don't think you can make any judgment about the potential for this industry as a consequence of what happened to the value of the tokens over the last 12 months. I think that's just wrong-headed thinking. But the way to think about the value of the tokens is as a derivative of the value of the use value of the protocols that they enable. As a consequence of which I think he's largely right that Bitcoin will not be the major use coin in the industry, but I do think we could find ourselves in a way in which because it's the most secure and the most decentralized, it could be the place where we store the value that's creating the other coins that might be in more of a proof of stake rather than proof of work, less secure, less decentralized, but easier to use kind of format. We can come back to all that later if you'd like.
So it's often described by many people as a digital gold. Is that where you see perhaps a lot of the value of Bitcoin right now?
Well, I think the freshman year class is not like gold at all because it's enabling transactions, right? So to think about it as gold is really not understand what digital currencies do. But the graduate level course is when you really kind of take it all apart, it might be that the role of Bitcoin in the system could be to bring value back to and hold your value there while you have tokens that have other use cases that you aren't using at the moment. That's just one thought where I am right now. Brad is looking a little skeptical. So, so we'll see what he thinks. But
I wouldn't say I'm skeptical. I mean, the things where we all agree here is I think the long-term value of any digital asset will be derived from the utility that it delivers.
Precisely.
I do think that there is clearly a lot of examples where you have digital assets. I can't figure out what the utility is. I agree with Jeff that if you take Bitcoin as it exists today as a static thing, the scalability problems, proof of work as a model has some real significant limitations. There are lots of people trying to improve that. Maybe they'll be successful, maybe they won't. I'm not prepared to say Bitcoin goes to zero. I still own Bitcoin, partly because, as Glenn describes, maybe it becomes just a store of value. However, Ripple, and we build upon a technology called XRP, because it's extremely scalable as compared to Bitcoin, it's extremely low cost and extremely fast relative to how Bitcoin works.
Edith, where do you stand on what happens to Bitcoin or where its position is going forward in the broader crypto world?
I found myself actually sort of travel in between different community, and I was actually just in Singapore in a finance conference, and there's a good percentage of people really believe in Bitcoin. And if you talk to a lot of the protocol level, regardless it's from some of the Chinese protocol like Neo, Quantum, all of them, the existence of it is to continue to support Bitcoin. At the same time, you know, for our fund, we want to focus on investing in the technology. I'm not a trader and I'm not a hedge fund. So the crazy up and down honestly doesn't really impact us. Even though obviously, you know, a lot of people between the period of early 2017 up till about March of 2018 is about 18 months is absolutely insane. Everybody just trying to do an ICO, and I would say 99% of them are all sort of scam. Most of these tokens have no utility whatsoever. So in some sense, I think it's a really good thing that now the crypto secondary market have sort of in some way fizzled out, because the people who are here now building are the ones that really believe in the technology and here to stay for long term.
Great. So all of you have mentioned the underlying technology, blockchain and protocols. So Jeff, you often talk about the next generation of blockchain protocols. So what do you mean by that? What do we have now, and where is it going?
Yeah, I think if I take Glenn's protocol, if you give me a little bit of creative leeway here, if you think of Bitcoin as kind of the first protocol, largely 4 columns in a spreadsheet with an access script, right? And then Ethereum came along and put some logic on it and sped it up, made it a little perform better. It's about 25 times faster than Bitcoin. Now you get into these third generations that get to proof of stake and some of these other things. We're looking at one, Definity, that came out a while back now, or is coming out. It's about 600 times faster than Ethereum. So now you're starting to see where, you know, we work a lot with corporations. You're starting to see industrial strength coming into that technology that hasn't been there yet. And I think that's why if you were at Davos last year, you saw everything blockchain just about everywhere, and now there's none. All of those models kind of went away. And I think so these third generation protocols, I think, will bring the infrastructure necessary, the speed necessary to make it industrial strength. And I'll start to see, you know, the analogy I would use is what I see in the third protocols is kind of what I saw, if you go back to the internet, what broadband means to the internet, these third generation protocols will mean to the distributed environments.
Edith, I want to ask you where you see the biggest impact from blockchain systems. What industries potentially are you excited about blockchain coming into, and how do you view the technology when it comes to you investing in companies?
I think to start with, you know, when we're evaluating, and I completely agree with Jeff, which is no matter how fast it is, I have a few protocols that will come and pitch us and say, hey, we're 500,000 TPS, and I'm like, Visa don't even need that. But the key thing is to think about as we're investing and looking at, you know, really interesting teams is, do they really understand the application of what they're building? Ripple actually is doing really, really well. Not China yet, but in like Japan and many Asian countries where, you know, the banks actually understand what you guys are doing. And of course, we're looking at many use cases, regardless of supply chain of trade finances, logistics, healthcare. I think the fintech side of things is the most obvious use cases, because why are we still paying the bank with all these fees? And when I send money to my mom, why am I still paying 40, 50 bucks per transaction? Doesn't make any sense. That's one area that we pay a lot of attention to. Another area which I'm really excited about is sort of the concept of privacy. And what that really means is, think about it, right? Today, why Facebook and Google are monetizing with our data? And if we think through not, you know, what blockchain can potentially enable, which is we need to rethink how we own all of our data. Doesn't matter is from a money point of view, for our browsing data, our location data, of everything that we own and meaningful today is really all digital. And we should sort of rethink who can access edit, delete, and view, and all that could potentially be enabled by blockchain technology.
Brad, I want to pick up with you because Edith mentioned fintech. You are a fintech firm, and I know you've spent a lot of time explaining the difference between what Ripple is and the token XRP. You have a couple of products. You have a blockchain product that does work with the XRP token, but you also have a product that doesn't require the XRP token as well.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Edith said, one of the things that I would say about Silicon Valley, I've lived there for 20 plus years, Silicon Valley deserves the critique it gets of oftentimes you have a great technology in search of a problem instead of a problem in search of a great technology. And I think that's clearly the case in the blockchain space. You know, people will say, well, I'm a blockchain company. And I think that's a curious way to characterize it. Like, what problem are you solving for what customer? I was asked on stage at some event, you know, is Ripple a crypto company or a blockchain company? And I said, no, we're a payments company. We happen to use crypto and blockchain to solve a payments problem. And I think for a lot of the companies interested in this space, you got to start with who's the customer? What problem are you solving? Does it scale? Kind of basic questions you would ask in any normal business.
But what I'm asking is it always necessary to have a token? Because all these blockchain companies, they're launching, they have an ICO, they're like, we have this cool token, and this is what our platform does, but you need the token for it to work. You have XRP, but you have the product that works without the token. So is there always need for the token, is what I'm saying?
Not always. When we use blockchain technologies to settle transactions between banks, some banks just do that with fiat. They're perfectly happy. They're existing at what's called pools of liquidity, nostra vostra accounts between banks. If you have those accounts, then you don't need to use crypto. There is an opportunity to fundamentally rewire how modern economic or modern financial infrastructure works in the pre-funding. You have about $10 trillion pre-funded at banks around the world in order to enable cross-border payments. If you could take advantage of crypto liquidity to fund real-time payments, you can actually take that $10 trillion and use it for other purposes, which is great for society. It's great for banking. It's great for industry. So that's what we're trying to rewire. We're lucky to now have about 200 banks that have signed up, but we've got a long way to go.
Glenn, talk to me about your thinking when you're looking to invest in these crypto companies. I know Arbor, Ripple, Circle, a few, you know, these are some of your investments that you've made. What do you think about when you're thinking about investing?
So Ted Turner once said that he was into cable before cable was cool, and I was into fintech before fintech was cool.
That's true.
I've been investing at the intersection of financial services and technology for more than 20 years. My investments included companies like NASDAQ and Ameritrade, companies I helped to start from scratch. The one area that I've looked at forever that we haven't been able to disrupt, one pool of profitability, was what you were referring to, Edith, which is the payment space, which is today. So one of my investments is a company called Virtu. There's a high-frequency market maker. We trade securities around the world at the speed of light for less than penny spreads. That penny spread is 1 to 1.5% the price it took to do stock transactions 20 years ago. So we've taken the price down by 98.5 to 99%. Over that same time period, it still costs 2% of every credit card payment you do, 5% of every FedEx transaction, 5 to 7% of every remittance, much less getting into payday loans and the financial services fees to the unbanked and the disadvantaged. It's a scandal. There's a massive pool of legacy property in the payment space that we can disrupt. So what I'm looking for are companies that can take the price of transacting down by that same 90-some%. That's how I get to it. I think that this is I've tried to find that for a long time. I think the digital currency solution is the first thing I've looked at and said we have the potential to do that. Like Brad said earlier, when you send an email out today, you don't think about the underlying technology you're using. You're not using a TCP/IP or an SMTP company. You're using an email. But every time you send an email, you use those protocols to send the email out. Just like in the early 2000s, we were building the underlying technology layer, enabling platforms, enabling infrastructure, on top of which we put the applications companies. That's what's going on right now in the digital currency kind of space. So you can hear us talk about a lot of confusing things about what protocol, what token, what technology solution, how many transactions per second. But eventually what's going to happen is you're going to put value, something of value in, something of value is going to come out the other side, and you're not going to care what the underlying technology is. And that's when you know we're successful.
Yep.
Blockchain has, of course, a lot of hype. Everyone wants to be a blockchain company nowadays, and you've seen that. Jeff, I want to ask you about some of the stumbling blocks to the adoption of blockchain technology and it getting mature as well. What do you see as some of those roadblocks potentially?
Well, I think it first starts with the definition. I think everybody back in the dot-com days.
That's a good point.
Everybody in the dot-com days created www.something.com. Now everything is something.blockchain. And you have to understand, I view it's open decentralized systems. There is not a single industry-wide open decentralized system yet. That's what we mean by open decentralized. You have lots of great centralized tech, but you do not have open decentralized tech yet. We do not see that. So when you start to understand that there is not a single pan-industry platform that exists today in blockchain as an open decentralized tech, now you have a definition you can work with. So why don't you have that? Well, the reason for it is decentralized tech needs to solve a problem that centralized tech can't solve. And one of the problems you see is probably trust, right? So what industries are reluctant to do is kingmake a startup. So if I want to create a real estate company that disrupts the real estate market from the idea of selling something to the buyers and all the way through that value chain, there's no way anyone in the real estate industry is going to give one startup all that power. But they would if it was an open decentralized system that no one owns. And so you have to start with that definition. Then you have to understand that we're talking about the protocol layer. That's like the database, right? Then you need the middleware. We're focused on investing in the middleware outside of some databases because there is no infrastructure in there to make this. And then you can get to the app layer. I think over the years, or the last couple of years, we see a lot of people focused on the app layer, but there's no infrastructure there yet. Yeah. And I think that's a huge problem, and that's where we're putting a lot of capital.
He makes a very important point, which is, we're talking at Davos about the fourth industrial revolution, and they're really missing the fourth computing paradigm. It's a really important thing to talk about. So over the course of my investing career, I've invested in mainframes, distributed computing, mobile computing, and now decentralized computing. It's the fourth paradigm that can fundamentally change the way in which we compute, and that's why the focusing on decentralization is really critical to understanding what's going on here. Does that make sense?
You just coined a phrase.
Edith, I want to get to you as well, because your big focus as well is on the Asian market, on China as well. Where do you see the technology being adopted the most? We know China's had a big crackdown on the tokens in particular, but it's very excited about blockchain.
So I think Chinese government have a love-hate relationship with blockchain and crypto. And definitely on September 4th, they blocked all the ICO. On September 11th, this is 2017, there's no RMB fiat to crypto on-ramp. Having said that, Chinese government is actually quite supportive of the blockchain technology. Hangzhou actually have over $1 billion in investing in blockchain technology. Certainly they block a lot of the ICO, but they didn't block any mining facility. It's still going. Shenzhen also has a blockchain-focused funds. So in China, I think that if we're looking at any sort of token-related thing, forget about it. But overall, Asia, I think, is fascinating. Japan is the first country where you see exchange regulatory regulations and licenses giving out to crypto exchanges. Many of them are, I was talking to some folks from the Japanese government. There are hundreds of people lining up and trying to get the license. Korea is a little bit sensitive, although I think it's interesting to see Kakao is also, like Kakao and Line, both of these messaging are thinking, in fact, Line already rolled out their token called Link, and trying to basically get as many of their users to use their token. And then the Thai government also just approved their exchange licenses and want to have this thing called ICO portal, which is to get STO, security token license, and plus to get more people to do ICO, but official broker-dealer license. So I think that in many developing countries where, just to start with, they don't even have credit card, there's no particular infrastructure. It's almost easier to see, sort of the blockchain-enabled payment, to see in Asia. You will see more action happening in Asia, I think, more than US and Europe.
Brad, often people tell me that regulation is a stumbling block to any new technology. This is no different. You spend a lot of time with regulators. Do you feel like they understand your business, but also other companies that are trying to build decentralized businesses?
I think as a general rule, the answer is yes. And I have spent a lot of time traveling around the world, whether it's Thai government, the U.S. government, educating them about how Ripple works, about how XRP works. One of the challenges I think many people in the world, not just regulators, they hear the word crypto and their brain goes immediately to Silk Road and illicit, illegal activities. And you have to kind of bring them up to speed of, no, there's real use cases, real utility that are actually good for governments, good for banks that can be leveraged. And so it's an education process. I mean, interestingly, I agree with Edith said, I think China has been incredibly strategic in really incentivizing, and you do see the vast majority of mining for proof of work tokens like Ether and Bitcoin happening in China. You also see the Chinese, I think that's the primary way China is investing. But look, governments around the world need to provide clarity. The U.S. government probably is a little bit behind on that. I think it's good that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has gone after some of the scams, gone after some of the ICOs. I think that's a good thing for the whole industry maturing, but we've got a long way to go.
I want to talk a bit about the idea of decentralization and what kind of disruption or threat that actually poses to the status quo we have in the tech industry, that the power of the Apples and Googles and Facebooks of this world. Glenn, you've talked about some of these blockchain companies could either be, an Amazon or a Google or the next Yahoo. Is big tech under threat, do you think, from some of these emerging technologies around decentralized businesses?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me come back to that. I'd like to emphasize a point that Brad made, which is really quite important. It's extraordinarily important from the very beginning that this industry gets the regulation right. Right, for two reasons, the current reason and the long-term reason. The current reason is because your starting point for this technology is the financial services economy, you need to work within the rules that relate to securities markets and banking, for sure. And unless you, and doing that will enable you to thrive inside the industry. In the longer term, every major player that's successful in technology runs into regulatory barriers at the end. IBM had a massive antitrust battle with the government. Microsoft had its massive antitrust battle with the government. Google, Facebook are heading into major legislation right now about privacy. And so solving those problems up front is actually a real advantage to the industry. That's kind of, I think, big point number one. Big point number two is that, to answer your question, finally, is that IBM didn't become Microsoft, Microsoft didn't become Google, Google didn't become Amazon, neither one became Facebook, and none of them became Uber. In other words, the next revolution that occurs doesn't necessarily, might obsolete the companies that come before, but it's all about inventing something new and different. That's a very different business and a very different opportunity set than what came before. So the incumbents aren't necessarily threatened. They're just not going to get there because they're not operating there, if you know what I mean. That's kind of one. Two is the people that are most threatened by all this in the short term are the, as Edith was talking about, the financial services players that have not deposit taking and lending parts of their businesses, but all the things they get paid all these fees for. Payments, FX, custody, all those sort of things. So I think someone was talking about the cost of trust.
Yep.
All the things that we pay for to create trust in a transaction. Being able to transaction in that have all these fees and there are all these bridges, people on top of the troll to gate taking a toll each time you go across. All those can be taken out by this technology, and those are the people that are most threatened by this, rather than the big tech companies.
I totally agree with this. Those are what we typically call these big money center banks. Citibank is actually the largest of all of them, and they represent about 13% of global liquidity management. They make about $8 billion a year in profits from those cross-border transactions.
This is not deposit taking and lending.
That's correct.
Is entirely different.
That is going to change. We can debate, I mean, Ripple's got a lot of momentum towards changing that. We can debate if Ripple will be successful, but as these guys have discussed, that will change because these technologies enable that to be reduced by even more than 99%. And it's going to come down to truly an internet. We have an internet of information. There will be an internet of value that allows value to move the way information moves today. Why can't I use email-like transactions to enable, a penny to transact? That's where we're going, and this internet of value, I think, will change a lot of different industries.
Guys, we've got to wrap this up, and I just want, literally a couple of words from each of you. When does this tech mature? When does it become widespread? Edith?
What am I have to do first?
You're closest to me.
I think, unfortunately, I think the focus actually shouldn't be just when blockchain will be adopted. I actually think that there's particular use cases that certain country will get on the payment faster than others. So in that case, probably in the next 24 months, I can see that happening.
Brad?
I think the industry always overestimates the impact in the short term and underestimates the impact in the long term. I think we're at least 5 years out from really seeing dramatic changes.
Jeff?
I think you'll see some of the performance get improved at the end of the year. And then I see some of the industries, I actually don't see financial services as being the first. I see some of these things around providence and other things coming first. And we have a few of those under development. I see that coming over the next 3 years.
And Glenn, final word from you.
Look, I think Brad is right. All the major technologies way overestimated what their market was in the first year or two of their introduction. And the ones that are successful way underestimated the 10 to 20 year potential. So we're in the beginning of this 10 to 20 year kind of cycle. And the answer to when is when one of the companies comes up with an application that consumers find transformative, and that will kick it off.
Fantastic. Brilliant comment to wrap that up on. It's going to be a very exciting year, I think, watching this technology and where it goes from here. A round of applause for our star-studded panel. Thank you very much.
Well done. All right. Good job.
Good job.